So we're going to start here with this one. How to prioritize self-care in your life and what that looks like for you. And we're going to do popcorn style. You just jump in.
Well, I'll start just because this is important to me because there was many years that I didn't prioritize my self-care. As you know, as a mom, there was a lot of time that we were sitting observing all this activity that our kids were involved in.
Yeah.
And I had kind of a light bulb moment. And unfortunately, at the same time, the light bulb moment came on, I was able to free up a little bit more time in my life because I had college age kids. But my mom got sick and to the point where she really couldn't, just her lack of strength and having enough oomph and wherewithal to kind of beat this. She ended up passing away after a fall, after about a 6-month journey of trying to get stronger. And it was like, it was a light bulb moment to me, like, okay, I cannot allow that to happen. Not that it was a different time period for my mom, so there's no blame about her not doing that, but it just was kind of a catalyst for me to make some changes in my life. So I definitely work out 3 or 4 days a week. It can be a really active, hard class. It can be walking, things just to get me out in nature, kind of really are good for my self-care. So I firmly use that for my sanity nowadays.
Yeah.
Very helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, Reilly, how do you find a space for this? Because you're working nights right now, you poor thing. Good thing you're young.
Yeah, I think this whole like concept of self-care is like kind of becoming like more, not like new, but more common, and people are like recognizing the importance behind it.
Yeah.
But I don't feel like it has to be these like big things that you do. It should just be something that like brings you rest. And I think just prioritizing like with my work schedule and how hard, obviously these last like 8 months have been, like resting for me, like without feeling guilty or without having like the connotation of like, oh, if I like lay on the couch for a couple hours and like catch up on some like really crappy television, that isn't like lazy. That's like totally okay for me to do. So I think taking that side of it out of it has been like just really helpful for me, and not having like the guilt behind just like having a full day of just like hanging out. Is totally okay, because it makes me feel better like on my days off, and then I'm like more rejuvenated like when I go back to work for my patients and such.
Yeah, absolutely. And you want to be there. I mean, I think you made a really good point. Find that thing that works for you. I think sometimes we get stuck in these, oh, I have to do the yoga, or I have to run, or I have to do, I have to meditate, and those things you do all those things, but find that thing that works for you, whether it's a walk in nature or gardening or whatever. I mean, some people don't want to be outside. Well, stick your head out in the sun because vitamin D is good for you, but just find that thing that works, that feels good, and don't feel guilty about it. Absolutely. And then I think Eileen too, I think something that our generation, I had this conversation in my friend's podcast episode when I was recording the other day. Our mom's generations didn't really have that concept, or weren't even given the permission, And so I think our generation, we are realizing, we're seeing the ramifications of that. And we're like, okay, we need to stop this. And we're catching it now. Whereas you ladies in your 20s and getting close to 30, you're realizing it now. No, we're going to go earlier even than mom did. So, all right. Elle, teacher.
Going off of what Reilly said, I read somewhere, I think it was earlier this week actually, but this idea of like rest kind of being like a guilty pleasure kind of thing, but really it's a necessity to be, a functioning human. And also what Reilly said, like little things, like I'm a very much an introverted person. So like just being alone is self-care for me.
Sure.
And it's kind of funny now, like my husband and he's working from home full time, and that started at the beginning of COVID. But we were together in a 1-bedroom apartment for like the first year of COVID. And I was teaching. And like home. Your marriage. Yeah. And our first year of marriage.
So much.
We made it out alive. We're still together.
Good.
But just like little things where I was like, okay, I just need to like separate myself from any type of like social interaction from anybody. And like kind of communicating that with each other too was tough. But I mean, and now I'm back in the classroom, so I'm with people all day long, kids who need things from me all day long. But my husband's at home alone. So I come home, he wants to interact with me, but I'm like, no, I need like an hour to be away.
Yeah.
So, just like little things like that. Yeah.
That's a really interesting dynamic. And that I swear we could do a whole like mini series on that dynamic you talked about there. All of a sudden we're all home together. All of a sudden we're in each other's space all the time, when if our space wasn't designed for us to be home together in each other's space all the time. And you're learning how, and you're in your first time of marriage, you're learning how to communicate to your partner what your needs are in just normal things. And then you throw that all in and it's like, I love you. You are awesome. But oh my God, if I don't get 5 minutes to myself, this is going to be really bad. My head's going to blow. I mean, and it has nothing to do with you. It's just, so even just learning how to communicate that in normal circumstances and then throw in all those dynamics. And then, because I was on the flip side, my work stayed at home for 15 months. We just went back last June into the office. Brady was only home for 3 months, but we had a 3-month period where Kylie and Courtney were home. Kylie and I and Brady were all working from home. Courtney was the only one leaving the house to go to a coffee shop to work. Oh my God. And we bought this house in Lubbock for everyone to come visit, not to come live and work out of. So all these spaces we had to create, and we have the full gamut of people in Courtney is our introvert and she needs her space. Kylie and I are more extroverts. Brady people think he's an extrovert. He's an introverted extrovert, extroverted introvert. That's what he is. He's that. When he has to be on for work, when he comes home, he doesn't want to be on. He doesn't. He just wants to go in his room and turn off the lights and watch a game or watch Netflix or something. So yes, but that dynamic though of just finding the ways to communicate of like, so that it doesn't get spicy, because it got spicy in our house a few times. But also too, when you're learning that with each other. So, oh man, Ellie, hats off to you all. That is very interesting. Taylor.
Yes, I have a lot of thoughts on like the concept of self-care, but I think one thing we've probably all shared as sisters is this idea of like thinking, like growing up, I thought of wellness, because I think wellness and self-care kind of go hand in hand. But like when I was younger, I thought wellness was like physical activity. Mm-hmm. And so when I think of like myself growing up, like all of us participated in all the sports, like every season of everything, we were doing something movement wise. Yeah. And which I love and like, I'm so thankful for that. But I think I got into this mindset of like, unless someone was telling me to run lines or like do push-ups, I'm not going to do it. Yeah. So like I spent like, after high school was a really sharp transition for me of like thinking about physical wellness differently. Mm-hmm. And it totally went to the back burner. And so then when I think of myself in like my college, undergrad and grad school, I like swung the pendulum. Like when you think of the wellness wheel, of like all these different things you can focus on, like I swung all the way to like spiritual wellness and like got really invested in like systems and structures of like faith-based practices, which was a gift. And I'm thankful for that time. But also I think I'm in a point in my life of kind of deconstructing some of those things as well.
That could be a whole other conversation. You and Sierra can talk a lot about that.
Yeah. And I think Sierra and I have similar like mindsets and perspective on those things, but a gift. But this time, I think post-COVID has forced me to think about holistic wellness in its wholeness rather than these parts. Yeah. And so like, unlike my sisters, I am an extrovert and I get my energy from being around people. And so that was one self-care for me. Like I was an open book. I processed my life with everyone. Yeah. And I'm now learning that I have a lot of, I don't want to say trauma, but like, I just have a lot of like beef with some things that I just, like processing with groups of people. Like, sure. Yeah. And so now I'm looking at self-care as routine. Because when COVID shut the whole world down, like I was in this little house and I have found so much joy in pursuing deep relationships with a handful of people. And it has been a gift to want to cook. It has been a gift to find an exhale like an exhale and a joy in moving my body, whether that was like for a long time, these high intensity workouts at Orange Theory. And now it's like, I do cycling with Peloton, and that has been a gift. And so it's like, I'm trying to look at self-care as the whole rather than swinging the pendulum to one side to the other. And I think that's how I live my life. Like, I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm really excited about this thing right now. And then it's this thing the next day. And that has been exhausting. And so I'm trying to just find my level ground in like wellness in every part of that wheel, I guess you can look at it. So it's been a battle, and I have not figured it out. And
we're at neither.
And I think that's the beauty of like, you know, especially like my sisters and I and my mom, like we have very different ways of looking at the world and like finding our fullness, enjoying things. And that is such a gift to be able to see how different we all are, but move through the world in very different ways, but all get to, I guess, healthy outcomes, I guess.
Sure. Because it all, you found those spaces that work for you. Yeah. And you respect that of each other. Yeah. I understand that I've got a similar dynamic going on. This one, it kind of feeds into something you talked about, Taylor, too, with the relationships, but confidently setting boundaries. I would tell you, I didn't really have a concept of boundaries until about 1.5 years ago. I was just no idea. So the girls actually got a concept of that before I did. And when they first started communicating them to Brady and I, we were just like, what the hell does it mean you don't want to talk about this right now? We're talking about this right now. And this whole, like, I don't have the bandwidth for this. I'm like, well, I do. So it was a little bit of a battle for a while of finding our ground on that. But then all of a sudden, just through experiences Brady and I went through, we're like, about 1.5 years ago, the light went off. And we're like, oh, and I'm sure our three were like, oh, thank God. They finally caught up. Talk about your journeys with boundaries.
I can start. I think, like a lot of things, COVID has become the kind of like, you go back to, I'm like, oh, at the beginning of COVID, this kind of all changed.
Sure.
Working from home as a teacher was very, very difficult. At the probably halfway through the school year, I was still trying to figure out the boundaries. Like I am like, teacher is a part of who I am. It's not like my whole identity.
Sure.
And being able to turn that off and on every day while staying at home for like everything was very difficult for me. And families that I interacted with had a hard time with that too, like not having access to me at all times of the day.
Yeah.
So that was a big deal, like professionally. But my husband is pretty good about setting boundaries. I've learned a lot from him. He's very much like, it's my time, I'm going to decide who I give it to kind of person.
Ooh, I like
so that. Yeah, he's taught me a lot about saying no. Like, you don't want to do it, don't do it.
Yeah.
you don't want to go to this thing with all these people, don't go to the thing with all the people. So yeah, I think he's been super helpful. And like dynamics with COVID and how people view COVID has been really difficult for us. My husband has an autoimmune disease, so he's had to be very careful during this time because any sort of sickness, can kind of send him into his flare. So navigating that with people in conversations, like being very adamant about like, no, we are not going places that this is happening. No, we cannot go places with these people. If you're going to invite us, this is going to be A, B, C, all that kind of stuff.
We're going to have a mask on. Do not hug me.
And, I've dealt with like people pleasing. So it's like hard for me to, like I say to myself, I'm going to be very clear on my boundaries, but then you get to that person that like grandparents, aunts and uncles, all those people. And you're like, oh, you kind of start to step back on what you were just saying. And
it is one thing to set the boundaries. Sierra made a funny statement. She goes, I am awesome at setting the boundaries. I love setting boundaries, but boy, when you have to communicate it to a person who doesn't practice them, then you're like, then you get tested. You're like, okay, here we go. Especially when you're in that people pleasing, I don't want to disappoint anybody. This is my family context. It gets really tricky. And we have to kind of get rid of some of those, dispel those old myths of like, no, this is what's good for me and my husband and what's healthy for us. And that has to be okay. And I have to release what they're going to feel about it because and I have to say, like, there have been difficult conversations, but, everyone's, they care about you deep down. Right. So I think
most of the interactions we've had where we have to stick with those boundaries very consistently, you know, we get good feedback like, oh, we totally understand, you know, so I think that's also been helpful too. Hearing people say, yes, thank you for holding your boundary. Like, we get it.
Yeah. Well, and sometimes
so interesting. As mothers, you know, we raise these kids to, you know, all the things that you think are so important, such as kindness and compassion and empathy. But setting boundaries is huge. And I never taught that. I never learned it myself.
Me either.
And I never, obviously, because I didn't learn it, didn't know how to teach it.
I know.
Because I'm terrible at setting boundaries. It's funny, though. It's one thing in the work world, I feel like I'm so confident with setting boundaries. And I don't know if that's because I work part-time and they kind of know that's my 2 days a week. So they don't have to. I don't really have to reach outside those little uncomfortable boundary zones because this is my little set schedule. But I don't know why I'm not good at it in other areas. I think it's the people pleaser, or I'm just not good at it. It's so impressive to see my daughter verbalize that and be able to do that.
Yeah. But I think you're a little hard on yourself. Maybe you didn't talk to us like the word boundaries, but like you displayed it in different ways, whether that was like a conversation with dad of like, no, or a person's not coming to dinner, or like conversations that you would have with grandma. Like we saw what boundaries look like, maybe not communicated what that, like the word is, but we saw in different ways. For sure.
That's good. Cause I'm thinking, man,
I think that's often like more important than like saying, you know, like boundaries are important because like, I mean, being a teacher, like I could say things all day long, but if I'm not actively showing like what my words are saying, like kids are going to pick up on that, you know, like, wait, this is not matching up, right? Yeah. Like she says this, but she's not doing this. Your actions
are not lining up with what you're telling me.
So I think the showing is much more important.
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely. Absolutely. Reilly, how about you? I mean, in your work, especially, there's got to be some space where you're just like, okay, I cannot think or talk about taking care of anyone today.
Yeah, there's been times where like I've come home and I live with my boyfriend, Matt, and he's like complaining about like his legs aching. And I have just been like, bro. And I have literally said like I don't have the capacity to care for that right now, and I apologize. Like my tank is full of that. So but saying, I think we've all mentioned people pleaser, that I for sure 100% people pleaser. I get really anxious about like disappointing people, making people feel bad. So like saying no for me can be really, really difficult. And I'm still learning those boundaries of saying no to things that don't serve me, because if it doesn't serve me, then saying no is totally fine. And I think that that's something that I'm coming into, but definitely haven't nailed yet.
Yeah, I think it's a lifelong practice. And I think as we go through different seasons, it's going to get tried in different ways. You youngsters may get to a space where you get good at it, and then all of a sudden something changes. You take on a new partner, or you have a child, or, you know, or you move or change a job or whatever. And all of a sudden they look different again, and you've got to relearn. So it's okay. It's a journey. And I think too, as women, I have not talked to one woman. You guys are my 18th episode. And, you know, so I've talked to however many people that is, and some of them in groups. I've probably talked to 50 to 60 people at this point. Every single woman, except for my friend Joy Drake. Joy's the only one. And she just came out of the womb this way. She just came out with I don't give a damn when she came out. And I'm like, oh, I wish I would have had that. So I think a lot of it's culture. I mean, we are the caretakers. We are the tender heart. Patriarchy has told us that this is how you are, and this is how the world sees you, and this is how you need to be in the world. And then you add on to it professions where you're naturally taking care of people anyway. So I think it's really hard for us to shed that and know where that line is. Obviously, caring and taking care of people is a wonderful thing, and something that we should all aspire to at a level, but not to the point where it's people pleasing and unhealthy for us. But I think that's something that we are all kind of, as women and girls, brought up with that system. So I don't, I haven't talked to anyone except for my friend Joy, which was like, I didn't really expect that. I was like, geez, we've all got this issue. We've got to do something about this. So thank you. Thank you for your honesty and authenticity on all of that. Let's talk about taking care of our emotional health as much as our physical health, because I think we have learned over time, I think, especially when Eileen and I were growing up, and even much into when you all were even kids, you went to the physical doctor for this, you went to the mental health doctor for this, and the emotions were somewhere in between, but nobody was talking to each other. There was no understanding of the dynamic and the connection to how unprocessed trauma and unprocessed emotions are going to hit you physically at some point if you don't work them out. And so talk about how you've seen that evidenced in your life. Eileen, you talked about it with your mom and just not having that self-care practice, and I'm sure, and all your different, Taylor, you touched on this a little bit earlier, how just having some trauma about how things were worked out when you communicated in a certain way. And I think what happens sometimes is we have an experience and the experience is over, but we don't always finish processing whatever came out of that experience. The emotion's strong. We just move on to the next thing. And then all of a sudden it's building up. It's got to go somewhere. It doesn't just, go away. It's got to go somewhere. So talk to me about that in your practices and just awareness and journey with that.
I can start. So I think just like a little context, one thing I really care about what people, and maybe it's about how people view me, of like having my ish together. Like if I'm in a position of leadership, like I want people to think I'm the best. So it's this weird dynamic of in situations and circumstances I've put myself in that like amp up and feed the fire of like me needing to have on like a perfect face. And I also think, and like be really accessible for people. And I think the church culture that I was in fed that. And I studied higher education in grad school, and that feeds that of like students always in leadership positions and just being everyone,
well, you were Miss ASWSU.
Yeah.
You were in the front lines.
I love that. Like, I love when people like recognize those things, but it feeds this like unhealthy, like expectation that no one that is putting on myself, but I'm saying that I have to have it all together. And so even if I'm processing something like vulnerable or emotional, I'm never going to be fully frank about it because I have this, like everyone's watching me. And so even if I'm processing something hard, I have to get to a place where it's not hard anymore because I've processed it and like tied it with a bow. And so like, I like to say for a long time, like I was an open book, but in reality, there was this like depth that was kind of hidden from people because I didn't want people to see the parts that were not all figured out and fixed. And so thank God for therapy and counseling.
Yep.
So I finally realized, and I'm naturally a happy person. Like I can get there. Like I'm positive girl, like optimistic, much like my dad. Half glass full always. And so when COVID happened, I'm alone. I was too much alone with my own thoughts. And it was the first time that I like wasn't busy enough to run from it.
Yeah.
And so I sought out this amazing counselor who I adore. And it wasn't like I was processing these big things, but just over time of like words that have been spoken to me or, that I was dealing with a lot of shame and just like lack of confidence in who I knew I was or wanted to be. But there was all these weird expectations that I thought people had of me, but they really didn't. So I think emotionally, I was not actually dealing with my emotions for a long time. And I have big emotions. Like I wouldn't describe myself as sensitive as much as I just have big emotions. I have big feelings and like, I feel things really big and deeply. And so I think therapy and counseling for me, just to talk to someone that's not in my group of friends or in my church or, in my family was super healthy for me because it was like, my eyes were open to, I don't have any expectation to do it. You can do what you want. Like walk in the world like you want to walk in the world. A jaw to the floor. Like what? And so there's this like, I could have a whole podcast on how church culture perpetuates this narrative of like, like you can reach perfection. And if you're not, if what you've learned and you've studied and you know who God is, and like you can get to this place because you know better. I'm like, everyone's lying. Everyone's lying. You can't get there. And so there's this weird pressure that's like, I can't say what I'm really thinking because I know what's right. And so, oh my gosh, this girl, my therapist, Amy, she's a total saint. And she just like gave me real practices outside of, it's no surprise that me and my sisters and my mom have a lot of different worldviews of how like we operate in our faith or believe about the bigger world. Yeah. And so that was something even challenging for me of like, okay, my family doesn't even have like the same, like really belief structure that I do. And so I needed to talk to someone that didn't know anyone that I knew. And this was that. And so I think everyone should go to counseling. And I'm not actively seeking out that right now, but that like year of me just meeting with her bi-weekly was such a deep breath for me. Yeah. Yeah. And I will say like, not everyone has access to that. So I want to
absolutely. It's a privilege. That. Absolutely. Yes. It is a privilege. And it is something that I think we have to do a much better job of. And I'm really trying to be focused on supporting those avenues that make that possible.
And
but
so I
thank you.
I think like, but even just normalizing, because I think there's a lot of people that can have access that still will not seek it out because of the narrative of like, you need to be hurting to seek that
There's
out.
There's something wrong with you.
Yeah.
You had something big happen to you.
Yeah.
And
so I think, and I think our world needs to get to a better place of where it's accessible to everyone. And there's some amazing, even like locally in Boise, programs that, you know, give access to people who normally wouldn't have access. But I do think for me, that was just a big gift, was a counselor that I could see consistently.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Just watching my kids kind of navigate that, you know, I mean, it's not something that I was raised feeling comfortable to, I mean, I guess I never even thought about, wow, I should go see a counselor. Yeah. But actually seeing them verbalize, hey, I really feel like I need to go talk to somebody, was just like, oh, I'm so proud of them. Yes. Because I just didn't ever seek that out. And there was many of times, my kids could probably remember this whole taking care of your emotional health. When I started suffering from anxiety, and I know you can relate to that, Melissa, and it felt like it was out of nowhere. I could not figure out why. Yeah. But obviously there's something in my past that was leading me to bottle this up, and eventually it came out. And my kids were of age where they remember it. My husband was just like, what is going on? Yeah. And I couldn't really verbalize why I was having this anxiety, but it's enabled me. It made me just so much more aware of the physical and the mental and emotional health, because that's kind of that same time period of life when my mom was sick, and previous to that, my dad was sick. So I was like a caregiver. Yeah. Because there's two of us that live in Spokane. I have 5 siblings. Okay. But 2 of us are in Spokane. So it was during that time period where I had 3 small children, somewhat of a caregiver for my father, had that Alzheimer's, and he and my mom weren't together. And then after my dad passed away, then my mom became sick. So it was this constant caregiver, but also trying to work and take care of my children. And it came out. It came out, and it was like, oh my gosh, it's time to start addressing all those things that you're bottling down, and it's going to come out eventually. And it's enabled me to really understand, if I get that feeling, I can put it into words now. Before I was like, I don't know where this is coming from. But now I can kind of go, okay, I'm getting that feeling. Okay, let's think about what's going on that's making me feel this way. So it's so awesome to see my 20-some, 30-year-old daughter and 20-some-year-old daughters be able to verbalize that at such a young age in comparison to me.
Well, yeah, I think you and I can both speak to that, to like, thank God they won't hit this space because our bodies will tell us if we're at max out point. And I used to view that as, oh, my body's letting me down. And I'm learning to now view that as, no, my body is my friend. My body is helping me. My body is speaking to me and saying, we're at a cap point here. And I think also too, Eileen, if we were to tell our parents because of the way they grew up that we needed therapy, they would have been like, oh my gosh, we failed, or oh my God, or get defensive. Why do you think you need therapy? I mean, there was just this whole different stigma. And the first time I sought it out, I grew up in a very volatile family scenario. First time I sought it out was at WSU when I was in college. And it was actually through the sports therapist when I was working with the volleyball team. And I was like, I didn't want to tell anybody that I was, having to go to therapy because they were going to think I was crazy. I mean, it was very much still the dynamic, whereas I think we're finally normalizing it, and we're finally starting to have conversations, and your all's generation, is embracing that and like, let's have this conversation. Let's normalize it. I mean, in my perfect world, my physical doctor, my therapist, and my dietitian are friends, and they're in the same office together. And they're like, all right, she's processing this trauma right now. So we're going to feed her body in this way, and we're going to give her this emotional support because it's all connected. So, all right. Who else would like to share on that?
I can piggyback because I started to go to therapy when I moved to Boise, like pretty soon after. I am not somebody who enjoys change. I love constant. I love knowing what's next, like in my, like being able to plan that.
And one thing before Reilly speaks, I remember when Reilly decided to move to Boise. Reilly was adamant she didn't want to be in Spokane her whole life. And I just give kudos to all my kids to go away for a while. Yeah. And when she told me that, I was just remember, I said, I just want you to know, changing jobs, moving to a new city, moving in with a boyfriend, those are life change. Those are things that can bring a lot of emotion and stress. So just be prepared that could happen. And I remember when she did call me, and it was like, okay, I'm having all those experiences now.
Yeah. Like I knew it was going to be like, okay, this will be like a little challenging, but I was pretty naive to think that I could have handled it as better, essentially. So the way these emotions manifested was just like anxious all the time. And I just felt like everything was changing. And the one thing that was constant was my boyfriend, Matt. And I just became like a leech, I felt like, on him because he was the one thing that stayed the same. Sure. And I was like, I got to go to therapy. I got to talk to somebody. But Mom, I remember telling you, like, I think I'm like searching out getting a therapist, and such a privilege. My hospital offers free therapy. So good. But I remember you saying something like, not like, is this my fault? But like, did I do something wrong?
Right.
And I think
and you have said that before, Mom.
Yeah. So I think that just goes back on like,
it's our generation,
previous generations. Like, and I was like, no, I'm just going through some things that literally have nothing to do with anybody else but me, and not know how to process this. I didn't have like this life altering like therapist like Taylor did, but I am not somebody who likes to like burden anybody with my emotions. And so just seeking out another person to like talk to, I was just like really proud of myself that I just even did that. So
yeah. And good for you for giving yourself credit for that.
Yeah. And I will say, like, it's been so interesting. And I don't know, because like, obviously our sister dynamic is such a gift, and like we have great relationships. And I think when I look back, even like the intensity of relationships in high school, like the biggest thing we would fight over is the clothes. That's like, there was never like, we fought over friendships, like fought over like who got more time, or like who was liked by our parents more. Like when I have such fond memories of growing up with my sisters. Sorry, if I get emotional, I have big emotions. But when Reilly, so I had the privilege of getting Reilly and Ellie in both high school and in college, because I'm in the middle.
You're in the middle.
We're all at Meade together, and then we were all at WSU. Saw them like in the sorority, so I got like everything. And then I was the one who moved across the country and like for a little while, and I have not lived in the same city as my sisters. I was the longest one in Pullman too. This was the first time I'd ever been in the same city as a sister again. And there's just been so much life change since that. And I vividly remember Reilly coming over and like, yeah, I'm having a hard time. And I was so excited for her to move here. And so then and as someone who has been told, like, I have like a mentorship personality, like love sharing my opinions and thoughts with people, Reilly was like, processing like kind of how she was feeling. And I had like no words. Like I felt like I could not say the right thing. And she left and I just like wept. I was like, did I convince my sister to move the city? She hates it. Oh my God, I don't know what to do. Like, and then I was like, I didn't say any of the right things. Like I can't help her process this because so much of it was my own feelings of like remembering when I moved to Texas and Fort Worth and having no one and being like, this is scary and hard. Yeah. And so I was feeling all those same feelings that she was feeling. And I was like, I didn't say any of the right things. And so it's been so interesting to realize how much we all have changed and being in this like less distance from one of the sisters. It's like, yes, we're sisters. We're also like learning how to be in the same city and like have a friendship sister relationship. It's been a long time since that. And so I think that has been something I've been learning from. And then you also feel like shame and guilt because I'm the sister that always forgets the birthdays and never sends things. And like, this is the first year, like I sent birthday gifts. This is like a gift. And like, so I don't know. It's just, I'm just learning so much about being in tune with my, like the emotional health of my sisters.
Yeah.
For the first time in a long time.
Yeah. I think that's a really, really good point because you said so many things that I'm like, yes, in our house too. Yes, in our house. So that made me chuckle. But also too, you're talking about being together in the same, city again. And, Reilly's coming with a partner this time. It's not just Reilly and she's processing this move and she processes it very different than you. And so learning how to be sisters together, Sierra has this dream that everyone's going to come and live in the same place with her. And she's doing all these things to try to cultivate that and make it possible because it's a really big, like super important thing to her. And Tim, thank God, loves the sisters and he's along for the ride. But Kylie's like, I kind of like moving all over the place. And she's in a very serious relationship. And I don't see them necessarily ending up in the Northwest. And so Kylie's like, I love my sister so much, but I just don't think I'm ever going to be. Yeah. and like literally Sierra's buying a house. You're like, Courtney, when you're done at school, the house is ready for you. And so, so that dynamic of how you see and want to be together, but, also seeing yourselves as adults in your own relationships and like, processing how that looks now compared to when you were all together growing up and in that dynamic. And Reilly too, I think giving yourself credit for getting that help because you did a lot of things. I mean, any one of those things that you did is called a big change, whether it's a job change, moving in with somebody that when you haven't lived with, them before and changing cities. You did all three of those things at one time. And so it's just like, oh my gosh. I mean, it's a lot. And I think it's a lot too when your partner deals with things differently than you do too, because you all know we've moved a lot. We've lived all over the country. And so when Sierra and Tim moved from Southern California to Bellingham, Sierra was just like, oh yeah, we're moving again. This is only like Tim's second move in his life. And so Tim's like having all these emotions and feelings about moving and changing parts of the country and locations. And Sierra's like, oh, that's just normal when you move. And then she's like, I had to stop myself and realize he's lived in Chicago area and Southern California and here. That's it, which is a lot for some people. Whereas Sierra could name, 6 cities that she's lived in and places of regions of the country. So even too within that, Reilly and probably Elle, you've dealt with that too, and moving in and like how we each process those things differently. So not only learning how we as sisters process our emotional, health and all those things, but how our partners do too. There's a lot, so much in that.
Well, I was going to say, it's kind of the whole emotional health thing is, I feel like it's a big buzzword now, but I'm seeing it in the classroom a lot, like me personally trying to prioritize with kids because, at a young age, if they can learn that emotions are normal, but like the way you respond to how you're feeling is what's like really important.
Yes.
I feel like, you're just going to get so many more well-rounded adults, which we need more of. So
absolutely.
But it's kind of like, forced a lot of that learning on myself too. And like seeing that in other adults that I'm around, kind of like, wow, we were not taught explicitly like how to navigate like big feelings and like the connection to like your physical well-being too, like teaching the kids, like your body is talking to you. Like you feel certain things when you have big emotions, and these are like the strategies you can use like when you feel these big emotions. And it's interesting to hear them talk about things because they have a lot of stereotypical views about emotions already, and they're 7 and 8. Like,
isn't that amazing?
Boys don't cry, or boys cry, but men, like older boys, don't cry, that kind of stuff. Or it's not okay to get upset. Like it's bad to be mad or like frustrated, or even like the simple things of like making mistakes. Like I can't not be perfect all the time. Yeah. Like I can't try things and fail. Like that's not okay. So it's really interesting to process that with kids. And then seeing like my husband think about like things when he was growing up and like how emotional well-being was talked about in his family. And like, you know, the priority of being like physically well, but like your mental health is also very, very important. And like you said, they tie hand in hand. So yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think that's one of the most important things. People, if you don't get anything else out of this, if you have little kids, I think that there's this thing about emotions and whether they're positive or negative that get ingrained upon us when we're little, like 4 and 5 years old, about that's a good emotion, that's a bad emotion. Like these are just emotions.
Right.
We were built to feel emotions so that we know what's going on in our bodies, in our lives, and what we do with them, or how our parents or, you know, teachers or whatever respond to them. That's what matters. Do we have the tools to do that? And this whole idea, I mean, of these poor little girls and little boys get it. I mean, these poor little boys that have these sensitive little hearts that are shamed for crying when they're 7 years old because somebody told them that wasn't okay, when that's just who they are. I mean, that to me is one of the most important things that we can change the narrative on. It's like, these aren't good or bad. These are just okay. This is who you are. It doesn't matter if you're a boy or a girl. And just have the response to that. We can change the world if we can get that, you know, into these kids at that stage. My brother does a thing. He's a cardiac NP. His wife's a teacher. We grew up in a very patriarchal, boys do these things, girls do these things home. He has a boy and a girl. He does this thing with this little boy every night. Because my brother, he's the youngest. He was a big feeler, and that was squashed in him early. And so he sits with his little boy every night. He's 7 years old. And he's like, what made you happy today? What made you sad today? What scared you today? What was fun today? And they talk all that through, because he is committed that, you know, Deacon, no matter how many fun sports or whatever things he does, which he's going to never, ever be shamed for being empathetic, for being kind, for crying, for feeling. And that has to start. You see where people get, and you know, your mom and I have seen this with people, they get to their mid 40s and there's all these like breakdowns of marriages, of relationships, of your own mental health, because of these narratives that we got when we were so young. So so that's world changing. Thank you for speaking to that, because I think that's so important. So important. How can we support ourselves and other women in living unapologetically? We as women are the saying sorry champions of the world for things that we have no control over, or just they plain aren't our responsibility. I mean, I don't know how many times I said to my daughters when they came home, they had a bad day, I'm so sorry. Why am I sorry? It's not my fault that kid threw a rock at you at the playground when you took his basketball. Why am I sorry for that? But I mean, and Brady's really good. My husband is really good. He's like, take that back. Why are you sorry? Because he noticed that from me in the get-go. He's quit apologizing for everybody. They're not your responsibility. So he's been really good about holding me accountable for that. It's taken a while to sink in. He's also recognized I had anxiety when we were, you know, first dating, but took a while for that to sink in too. He stayed with it. But talk to me about that, about how, you know, how that plays out in your life and where it roots from and how you deal with that.
This is a tough one for me. I don't really even know how to put it in words. I'd be interested to see my daughter's take on it. I feel like I'm really supportive of other women, but I've never been in a field of work where that's not allowed me to. I don't know. I guess I've never. That's hard for me to kind of visualize that I would not be one of those that would champion other women. But I know that happens all the time in certain workplaces, and even our kids growing up in a very competitive, succeed academically as well as
maybe sports or some other type of activity that you're involved in.
Yeah.
So I'm interested on the take from my daughter's perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I always think of like how the role of social media plays into stuff like this these days too. And I mean, as a 30-year-old, I even stop myself like, why are you comparing yourself to all these other people? Like, so I think just like in terms of like scrolling through social media, knowing that everybody's a human and processing all these different things, maybe not out in the open, but also I think being like, I think about like my friendships with my girlfriend being like a safe space for people where they can feel vulnerable and, you know, express how they're feeling or, you know, worries or excitements with me without judgment. Right.
Yeah.
And I think like humans kind of judge just without even thinking about it.
Yeah.
It's just kind of depending on like what lens we're looking at life through. So I'm trying to be better about that too. Like asking, wait, why is this person feeling this way? Maybe like, you know, being curious versus judgmental.
Yeah.
And wanting to know more versus being like, well, that's dumb, or why would you ever do that? Or why is that a worry that you have? So just kind of maybe just like altering your lens a little bit. Yeah.
I love what you said about being curious instead of judgmental. I think curiosity can change the whole way we approach anything, whether it's a negative thing that I'm curious why they did that, or a positive thing. Oh, they did that really cool thing. I'm curious to know more about them. Thank you I love that word. That's one of my son-in-law's favorite words too. And I'd never thought about it that way before until he started talking about being curious about, I'm like, oh, that's a really good way of taking that judgment lens off.
I think it's, it pops up a lot for me in the classroom because kids are very impulsive.
Sure.
They don't, and they can't explain why they do things. It's just, you know, their brains, like literally their brains are not developed to express like why they're doing certain things. So I always think of like, okay, my immediate reaction is to correct behavior, but I'm going to connect first, like get to their level, right? Be curious about what is going on to really figure out, like, can I navigate this a different way versus like being like, no, you're never supposed to do that. Why would you ever do that? And I've kind of stopped myself from asking like why to kids too, because they don't really know.
They don't know.
All the time.
It's what they've seen. It's what's been modeled to them.
Yeah.
You know, they don't know, or maybe not even that. It just came out. But I love that. I thought, okay, if I have any friends with grandkids, where do you teach at? I want them in your classroom. Honestly. I love that.
Yeah.
I think for me, so I moved to Boise. I accepted a job at Boise State and initially in the realm of fraternity and sorority life. And I was big into sorority at WSU, and it was a fun first job, like out of grad school, and I loved the students I met. But I have a lot of opinions now on fraternity and sorority and the benefit it is to college campuses. And like, I do think there's a lot of connection and leadership development and growth that can happen in those spaces. But I think, especially when COVID came around and, you know, we all had a lot of conversations about race, you know, the summer of 2020. And I grew pretty cynical of being a representative for sorority and fraternity.
Yeah.
And like can still see the benefits of it.
Sure.
But it's one of the reasons I transitioned out into the job I'm in now, which is for a local B Corp called SALT based in Boise, which makes reusable period care products for people around the world. And so
I love that.
So it's cool. Menstrual cups and period underwear. And so I think the nature of my work that I do now by design gets me amped about women.
Yeah, for sure. You're in the middle of one of the most important things that they deal with that in some areas don't get dealt with well.
Yeah. And so and also the way, so it's my first time I've ever been like so proud to tell people what I do for work because there is no, besides stigma in like, people are like, wait, what? You talk about periods or like vaginas every day.
But I love that. We got to normalize that too.
Yeah. The shock, once the shock factor is gone, it's all good and important work in what we're doing. And so I think it's been so cool to be in an office run mostly by women, owned by a woman who prioritizes like free childcare for both men and women that are parents.
Nice.
And so it's just been a breath of fresh air where I came from. College structures, which I love college and university students, but it is so structured and hierarchical and political. And now I'm in like a startup world where it's like anything goes, I'm just like, oh, what? So it's been so cool to think and see it modeled for me, women championing other women in a very real way and giving access.
An authentic way. It's not posing or any requirement. It's authentic.
Yeah. And so that has just been really cool. Like I love my job, and I love seeing tangibly the impact work that it does for women.
Sure.
And just all people with periods. So that has been really cool for me to see tangibly in my life right now. And I think there's a whole other component, like Elle, I loved what you said about judgment, and like we're all by nature people who judge, but I think I'm trying to think of that differently as well. Like, okay, how can I connect with people rather than just like putting up.
Well, and I think just that reality, whenever you start getting into therapy and start doing your own work, you start realizing we've all got shit.
Yeah.
And we've all got stuff that affects how we interact with the world based on how well or not we have dealt with it.
Yeah. And I think just our world, like right now, is so binary. Like you have to have an opinion of like, I agree with this. I don't agree with this.
Yeah.
I agree with this. I don't agree with this. And I'm just like, I don't land on one side of the coin based upon how I vote politically, how I like have a faith practice. Like that is not, I can't do that. Like my brain doesn't separate it as easily.
Yeah.
And so where our world feels like it's forcing us into this space where you have to choose. And then like, I'm automatically judging people that probably are judging me because they think I think a certain way. And so that has been really hard to just, come to terms with like, okay, I'm thinking the same thing about that person as they're thinking about me. Like that is not kind. Like I need to stop doing that.
Yeah. Well, I think you bring some about where we are in the world. And for Reilly, you're like living right in the middle of it, because at the end of the day, it's your job to take care of all these people, regardless of where they land on the spectrum. But then all of this stuff that's stuck within that in terms of how you handle your own personal health versus the hospital, what you're being told, how do you champion for yourself? Oh man, that's got to be just.
I feel like I've had to kind of learn what like compartmentalizing is, because you do have to separate it. Like one of my first sessions with my therapist was like, when you come home, like, what's your routine after you like get off shift? And I was like, oh, well, I take a shower. And she was like, when you're in the shower, like, and the water's like hitting you, like envision that's washing away like that shift for you. And that helped a ton, because I had especially within my first year of nursing, such a hard time sleeping because I couldn't like shut it off when I'd come home.
Yeah.
And then I'd be thinking about going back that next night. And then obviously like with COVID, everything was exasperated. And so learning how to like shut those things off is something.
Absolutely. So how in the nursing world have you guys championed and supported each other? How's that looked? Has that been complicated? How's that looked?
Yeah, I think a lot of people have had to adapt and change. And obviously like healthcare is it's a team sport, essentially. Like you just can't do it by yourself. But I feel like a lot of people have had to take on that like team mentality to a whole different level. And that was another thing when I went for my first job at Kootenai for 2 years and then went to St. Luke's, and it's an incredible unit. I've really enjoyed it. But those first few months was really hard because I didn't feel like they were my team yet. And so I felt alone every time I went to work. Like I didn't know who was like, they call it like your work wife or like your best friend at work. Like, who is that for you? I didn't have that. So it was really hard for me. Like I had so much anxiety going into work because I'm like, okay, if something does go wrong, I didn't have my person that I could like rely on at that point yet. Yeah. And now like I had even told Matt yesterday, like, I'm really content with my job again. Because like I go to work and I'm like, oh yay, like Whitney's working or like Lindsay's here. So I think that makes a huge difference when you have people that you know you can rely on. Yeah. And it's so unpredictable and you have no idea what's going to happen during that shift. When you have people that you're stuck in a room for 2 hours and then you come out and they're like, oh, I passed your meds. Where you like, it just makes your whole shift something different.
Well, you talk about an important thing there. I think to be for each other, there has to be an element of trust. And when we go into these environments, you don't like who's for me, who's not for me, who has that scope, who knows what that means. And so you've kind of, and especially I think it's different for someone who's an extrovert versus a little more of an introvert, a little more reserved, and maybe takes a little more time to build those relationships and that trust and that circle. That's a huge piece because we're going to advocate for the people who advocate for us, but we're not, so I think that's just how we're built as human beings. I think we all genuinely want to be for each other, but we want to trust that the other person's for us too. And so we kind of, getting into that space where we feel like that's the normal and not the exception. And that we've got.
I think I connect with Reilly in the sense of like finding those people you can trust in the workspace. This is only the second school I've ever worked with. Mm-hmm. So I've been at this school for 8 years. So I've built like really good relationships and I've worked with really a team that's stayed pretty consistent the whole time that I've been there, and they're amazing. But I had, it took me a while, like several years to be like, okay, I can connect some of my work life with my personal life. Mm-hmm. I always thought like, I'm going to keep them very separate. Like, okay, these are my friends at work. Like I can talk to them about work stuff, but when I leave, like my personal life is very different. Yeah. But now that you've built relationships with people, I feel like I can be open and unapologetic and authentic with the people I work with. And I feel like I have kind of given some of that burden that I've taken on in my job to other people that are supportive of me. Yeah. So I think it's super important, like going to work and having people, that are there that you can say pretty much anything under the sun to, and they're not going to be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe she just said that. Or, so.
Absolutely. Yeah, that safe space. And I think, again, you hit that word unapologetic, not being sorry for who you are, is being comfortable in that, owning that, and knowing that you're going to be for people that are that way with you and that they're for you. I mean, I think that's huge. But it's interesting because I think in the sports spaces that you all have occupied at different times that my daughters have occupied, it gets really tough sometimes. You're kind of depending on the health that the coach has established or not established. Unfortunately, I think we've seen much more unhealthy than healthy in that. And that kind of designs and sets the stage for how much you can be for or doesn't feel like, for each other or against each other. And I think, Taylor, you're like naturally just built to be for people. But I think you've been in spaces where that hasn't been returned to you. And that, so how do you walk that out and feel safe in those spaces too? It's complicated.
Right. It is complicated. It's a weird thing because it's like so much, and even like sisters, like when you really think about it, like, and I feel so thankful that we didn't really grow up in a competitive sister environment. Like we all did have our very unique characteristics and things that we were good at.
Sure.
There is situations I even look at now, like how I unconsciously compared myself to my sisters. Mm-hmm. And I think they're like one that is just like top of mind right now is like my like self-image, like how I viewed my like body in comparison to my sisters is like something I've always been processing. Yeah. But like, I feel so thankful that it was in like a relationship and like sister dynamic where it's like so loving, where that could have been really detrimental to me as a human if it was like, like if my parents were telling me something like I need to look a certain way or like not eat those things, like I'm just like, I feel like I like bypassed something that could have been really, really dangerous. And so thanks, Mom and Dad. And so I think now I get to look back and be like, there's so many unique characteristics of each of my sisters that I'm able to look at other women that I work with or that I like exist in the world with and see those unique characteristics that everyone can bring something to the table. Yeah. And like, that is such like that's a culture that needs to be perpetuated more than what it is.
Yes.
Because I think a lot of people do really struggle with like, oh, I felt these things with my sister, or I felt these things with my best friend or my teammates. And that's why I respond the way I do at work or in my friends groups now. And so, yeah, I just feel thankful that like my own self-consciousness like wasn't perpetuated by my sisters or my family. It was perpetuated my own thoughts. And I've learned to respond in different ways.
And also perpetuated by our society in general.
Yes.
Social media, all that. I mean, I feel like, and I don't know why, but I just made a concerted effort. We didn't have, all those, magazines that had cover models, and we didn't get those subscriptions. We didn't buy them at the grocery store.
Yeah.
And just, I don't think that we really focused on, I don't ever remember talking about you shouldn't eat that. I don't remember that.
Like our self-worth was never tied to like what we looked like ever. Yeah. And I don't know. We always laugh because my dad got 3 daughters and a wife and girl dogs, right? So he was like the only guy.
And had 3 sisters.
All the sisters, right?
Yeah.
Hilarious. But like there was never, and I've had this conversation with my husband, there was never an opportunity for us to be like seen as the princesses or the girls of the family, right? Where the son took on these other roles. Like we're mowing the lawns, we're doing yard work. We have to get a job at a certain point. We're doing our own laundry. Like there was never a time for us to put our self-worth in just like being girls and being like what society was seen as girls, like just pretty and, you're there, to look at. So,
additionally, like I think because we're all in relationships, Ellie's married and Reilly and I are both in now longer term relationships. And I've seen it play out like introducing like my significant other to my dad. There's not this weird, like, let me grab my gun or like, you have to prove yourself here. But when I introduce him to like my dad's friends, there's this weird mentality of like, you have to prove yourself. And I'm like, that my dad has never operated like that. Yeah. Like he's always like, cool, welcome here. Yeah. And like, if you cross my dad in the wrong way, like he will share his opinions and like, but it's never like this really toxic masculinity. I've never seen that from my dad. Yeah. And I think that like also like my dad is a very strong character in the story of like helping us and championing us as women and like being like, go for it. Like do what you want. Like, I think my dad also plays a role in that too.
That's so important. So many thoughts on that because Brady didn't grow up with all sisters, but he grew up with a mom that was a woman before her time. Right. There was everybody learned how to cook. Everybody learned how to do laundry. He had an older sister and 2 brothers. She did not care. There were no cares about that. Yeah. And so consequently, Brady was much like your dad, kind of built to be a girl dad. And our girls adore him. I mean, they are all have their own unique relationship with him. They have Zoom coffee dates once a week. They fight over the time. I mean, but he was built for that. And that environment kind of prepared him, but kind of the same thing. No princesses, but that relationship matters. And how you see your dad interacting with you as a woman, as a girl matters. And it changes the scope of how you see yourself, how you see each other. I think that's really cool. And also relationships they choose. Absolutely.
It's just so wonderful to see all my daughters in relationships where they're supported and they're not judged and they're treated so kindly as well as respected. It's just obviously kudos to their dad for setting that as a role model too.
Absolutely. I mean, there's no question in my mind that plays a role in the relationships that are chosen as you get older and you move forward. So Reilly, as a youngest sister, how is it for you as, you have these 2 great sisters, they're out there, they're doing their thing. How was that for you coming behind them? Was it scary? Was it great? Was it both? Because I know that can be interesting as the youngest sister.
I feel, well, a couple thoughts. I feel like I had a path kind of set for me. So
Sure.
like, these are the teachers you're going to have because they had your sisters, and I'd get there. And then I vividly remember multiple times people would be like, you're nothing like Taylor. Like so many times,
but not in like a good, because I'm just,
right.
Yeah, not
Right.
right. Bad connotation, but like when you hear that, like I'm 11 years old, and it's just like this automatic like comparison. You're comparing me to a completely different person, and we're probably the most different out of everybody in our family. I don't know. Are we?
Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah. But then also, like, it felt really good to have that, you know, like of course I veered outside the lines of the path.
Yeah.
All are aware of that. But I always came back to it. Like, it was just this like guiding light that I had. It was a safe place. And I just feel really grateful that I had that. Of course, I tested the boundaries like any teenager does.
Absolutely.
But I also had really supportive sisters that just genuinely cared. They weren't like being these overbearing, judgmental. They were just doing it out of like pure love for their youngest sister, making sure that they wanted me to succeed in life. So I definitely think that comparison, I feel like women as in general compare each other.
Yeah. I think it's a very interesting dynamic because you spoke to a really important thing of, it was like, oh my gosh, why would you think I'd be like sister? But also this great path, because that's kind of I've heard that a lot from my daughters too. I mean, Megan Anderson had all three of my daughters, and they're all three very different human beings. They don't even look alike. And so, but yeah, kind of them kind of working out that same dynamic of both relishing and being like, well, no, I'm not her, but feeling both at the same time, and the sisters always being for each other. I think that's what's so beautiful about that relationship, that it starts so much at home with your mom and dad set the precedent for it.
Yeah, I feel like
created.
Like we said, the only thing we ever thought about was like clothes and like maybe what we wanted to watch on TV, but it never went like any deeper than that. It was super surface level things. And I feel like mom and dad just made that the standard, that you guys love each other like your sisters. And so I feel like that has continued into how we have relationships with other women. Like, just rooting for other women. It just feels better to do it yourself, and to know what it feels like to be rooted for by another woman is like that. Like, that just feels better than not rooting for them. So I feel like that's really good. Yeah. Like, because of how we were raised and the relationship that we all had.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Good stuff, ladies. The importance of setting and coming back to your why in everything you do. We all have different choices we make in terms of jobs we take, relationships we're in, things we say yes and no to. Elle mentioned earlier, some important things if they had to really establish a why during COVID because of what was safe for her husband in this time. So, and you all have moved in different spaces and chosen different routes. So talk about your why and how that forms, or if you're still finding it.
I don't know. This one's kind of tough for me too, because I think, I'll say it again, over the last year and a half since COVID, I think a lot of things have come to light, like culturally, the emphasis we put on our professional lives and how we often tie our identities to what we do professionally, and how that's not always the healthiest thing.
Right.
And I think my why professionally is very different than like my why personally. And like, how do I set the boundary between those two, but also how do I like kind of intertwine them so that they support each other? I don't know.
Yeah.
And like my husband working from home and him kind of navigating, okay, I want to stay working from home, but is his company going to force him to come back to the office? And him being able to kind of find this good balance of like taking care of himself physically and emotionally while working from home,
Sure.
but also giving himself to his job 100%. So I think, I don't know, I'm still figuring out my why, I guess.
Yeah.
Like my why professionally is to help support kids to be, you know, functioning humans in the world that they grow up in. But like my why personally is to make sure I'm a functioning person in the culture that I'm living in. So
sure.
Yeah.
Well, and I think you make up a good point there. It doesn't have to be a one thing, you know, it can be different spaces and different layers, and just making sure that, you know, I think words I really like around it too are values. Like, okay, what are my values? And does this align with my values, this thing that's happening? Because I think sometimes that puts a better frame on it too.
Yeah.
Well, I think when I got to the point where I could pick a job, and obviously this is once again a privilege to be able to pick a job based on something that feels that aligns with my values. There was a time period where you're working because you are trying to save money to help put these 3 daughters in college. And it might not have been the scenario of your dream job.
Yep.
But once the kids got through college, I was able to kind of put that into perspective a little bit for myself. And I wanted to work, like kind of how Taylor talks about her career now, even though it's not in higher ed, that she just feels so connected to it. And I think I was able to kind of take some time to go, okay, I want to go to a job that I feel supported, and I feel like I'm supporting a mission that I can 100% support and feel good about. And so that why for me obviously changed in the last probably 5 years, when I was able to take the time and kind of think about things that I really feel important in my life and what I want to, where I see myself in this world, this crazy world. So but I know it's a phase, like Ellie said. It's not always something that you can focus on, unfortunately, because of the reality of the world.
Yeah. Sometimes you just have to put food on the table.
Yeah.
Not everybody has that luxury.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Taylor, I think you were going to jump in.
Yeah. My why has really changed a lot this last year and a half due to COVID, due to like, you know, things just looking different in our world, and my own belief structure kind of shaping and shifting in different ways. And like how I want to exist in the world, how I want people to see me is that I'm walking around and making people feel seen, heard, and understood. And that like sentence has been really clarifying for me, like in controversial political conversations. Like if I don't agree with these people, I'm like, all I want them to do is feel seen, heard, and understood. And I want to feel the same way too. Yeah. And so I think a lot what my belief structure was rooted in is inherently trying to convince people of something.
Yes.
And where like I have just started to think really critically about that and not really having an answer for that anymore. And that's been really hard in itself. But I think that's still that like seen, heard, and understood is still like coming from a place of love and intentionality that I loved so much about, you know, being a believer in a faith structure. And so, and I want to walk around the world and have people see me and want those things from me too. So like, that's why I speak up when I have something to say, or why if someone's misinterpreting what I'm saying, or someone is saying something that I once said, but I didn't actually mean that, like I will clarify and communicate what I really meant to say. And it's why like there's longer conversations with my boyfriends when I'm emotional and I'm feeling big things, like taking the time to feel understood. And, you know, so I think that's like my why. And it helps because it's not so specifically tied to work. Life. It's like, it's very broad where it can fit in all of those categories. And so that's kind of my why, I guess.
Yeah, I love that. That's really good. So Reilly, has your why changed during this most crazy time to become a nurse? You obviously had a why going into that. How has that shifted, or?
I don't know if I have a why. I want to figure out my why. I think professionally and just individually, they look very different. Like Ellie was saying,
Yeah.
And I don't think they're coinciding right now.
Yeah.
Like I have a job that pays well and that puts food on the table and pays my rent, but I'm not absolutely the happiest I've ever been. And I just think it's a job that takes a lot out of me, like mentally and emotionally. And so I'm figuring out my why professionally. Individually, I just feel like I want to like love people and feel loved and like grow along the way. Yeah. And right now I feel like I'm doing that. And that's okay. That's
absolutely. And I love what you said about that's okay. Because I think you got to give yourself room for that in this time we're in. And you guys are in that time where you're figuring that out. And something that, Sierra made a big job change. She came out of this whole FCA world and a lot of culture issues within that were problematic, and had to walk away from a lot of people and groups she and Tim did that just weren't aligning with who they were anymore. And so they were kind of like, oh my gosh, kind of swimming in this, what does our life look like now? And they sat down, they took a weekend and they sat down and they just hashed out, they came up with 5 values. And she jokes, we can only remember 3 now. So the other 2 must not have been very important. And they've taken those, and it's a lot like what you're talking about, Taylor, is they just kind of look at whatever they're going to do when they were deciding what jobs, what city, what people. They're like, does it align with these spaces that we agree on? Does it align with those? And if it doesn't align with those, then the answer is no. And being committed to that, like Brady and I were like, we would have never had the courage at that age to be that committed to that. We would have just not. There's just zero chance that we would have been willing to be that. Kylie's done the same thing. She was in a program at Wake Forest in divinity school. And she's like, I'm not in this space anymore. This just doesn't align with who I am anymore. I'm walking away from this. This whole evangelical world is not where I want to be. It doesn't fit my values, and reapplied. And she's at University of Michigan now in a social work and public health context. That has its own challenges. That you were talking about education earlier, Taylor, and being in grad school and all those kind of stigmas and things that go with it. She's just like, and Kylie's, the funny thing is she wasn't really, you would not have thought she was the one. She's probably going to end up being a doctor, getting her doctorate. Everyone would have said Sierra was going to be that person in our family dynamics. And so those things that are kind of imposed, which we'll get on. But they found these, they kind of piggybacked off of their sister and Tim, which they do a lot. Courtney did the same thing. She found these values. She walked away from volleyball and scholarship at Adelphi because it just wasn't aligning with who she wanted to be, and went to Oregon State and charted her own path, but kind of did that thing where they sat down and were like, okay, we're doing these wild things, but not being scared of it. And I see you guys doing the same things too. Reilly's like, I don't want to live in Spokane my whole life. We're going to move to Boise. Ellie's like, we're going to go to Seattle. We're going to be a teacher. We're going to get married. Oh, we're going to live in a 1-house apartment. We're going to figure this out. And, and Taylor's like, I'm going to walk away from this space where I got my education because this isn't fulfilling anymore. So just commending you for your bravery. And I think I think you have more a why of just being true to yourselves, being true to what feels right and the most authentic to you. And it's so encouraging to see your all's generation being willing to do that, because I think, Eileen, we can say, we were in that era of like, we were starting to go to college. I was the first one in my family to graduate from college. And that was like, you go to college, you get the job, you get married, you have the babies, you do the thing. And that's what you do. And you don't really swerve from that. And you don't really stop to think, is this fulfilling? Does this feel right? You're just doing the thing because that's what you got your degree in. So that's what you do. And all this, and you all are not willing to settle for that. You want more. And I think that's going to be so healthy for you. So that was a whole lot of mom stuff, but I think that it's encouraging to see that, conversations that you guys are having and being willing to want more for yourselves across the board.
As moms, we get a lot of value as watching our children succeed. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you have this preconceived notion of what success is, and you kind of get locked into that. And it's so freeing to see their success in so many different ways and avenues of life, professionally, emotionally, and relationships, that I'm just so proud of all of them. And I'm able to realize that those expectations that I put on myself and my children it's their life now. And I have to just be supportive and be here if they need me, but these are their choices now. Yeah. It's not something I can control.
Yeah. Their journeys. I know the releasing control is a tough one.
Yes, it is.
That is and I'm not sure we'll ever get over that. I think it just goes with being a mom. Growing out of others' expectations and living out of your own expectations.
Sometimes this makes me think of like the birth order that you're born into too.
Yeah.
I didn't, and this was no one's fault, but like being the firstborn, I felt like it was harder to step out of the path that I was told to go down. Not that I really wanted to. My personality is very like, okay, I'm going to stay in line here.
I think that's the oldest thing too.
Yeah, you're just kind of like, okay, I'm the first one to do this. So I'm going to do what people are telling me to do. And I'm going to stay in this path because I don't want to ruffle anybody's feathers. But then now that like I'm an adult, I think some of those, like what you guys were saying about you grow up, you get married, you have kids, you buy a house. Those kinds of things are coming up more for me now as a 30-year-old.
Yeah.
Tony and I were never like, oh, we're going to have kids right after we get married. Well, we didn't get married till we were 28 anyway. So
right.
We were older when we got married, and we're just now having the conversations about potentially having kids. But, you get this stigma in your mind of expectations society has put on people where there's a certain order you have to do things in. And like, really, when you think about it, people do things out of order all the time, and life goes on and it's okay. And I was talking to my friend who lives in Manhattan in New York City, and like the way people live just in different communities, right? Like the idea of buying a house here in Seattle is wild and maybe not in the realm of possibility right now. But even in like New York City, dense populations, people don't buy houses. They rent for their entire lives, right? So it's like you kind of start to think, okay, the things that I do, as long as they're working for me and I'm happy and my partner's happy and we're fulfilled in what we're doing, like the expectations are not valued as much, I guess.
Yeah. I think it's really important. That's a really good, important separation, because we've noticed that living throughout the country. And it's like, we got locked into these ideas that we're supposed to be that idea. And like, there's so many different ways you can do it, and what feels right, content, good, peaceful for me. All right.
I think for me, so like I said, I went to grad school. I think there's two like distinct scenarios that I can think of, like that I really had to actively work about ignoring people's expectations and just moving through what I feel like is the best next step for me. And I feel like it's because my parents raised me in a family where it was like, Taylor, do whatever you want. Like they knew I was going to fly in a little different way, maybe a little more dramatically or loud, so anyway, but like with grad school, like I got my map in undergrad. I studied marketing and knew like I was going to be passionate about college, university, what I thought for a long time. And like, I went to grad school specifically for higher ed, student affairs and higher education. And with my first year and a half, I was like, I don't know if I can do this like I thought I was going to be able to, because I saw behind the curtain of what university systems look like outside of being a student. And I was like, oh, wow, I don't know. And I think I could go back eventually and like find my place there one day.
Yeah.
But I was like, I just got my master's in this. Like, I need to at least like explore other options. But it was just my next best step was pursuing a career outside of higher ed. And like, I am happy, I'm thriving, and I'm learning a bunch about private sector work.
Yeah.
And another like aspect of that is like, I've now been in a relationship for a year and some months with an individual who doesn't think the same things about the world that I do. And got a lot of pushback and a lot of hard conversations, not from my family, not from like people that have done life with me forever, but from groups and communities of people that had an expectation of what my life and the partner I choose needs to look like. And I'm really struggling with that for a long time. And so I think like it has been such a gift to feel so confident in like my next best step. And so that has been 2 active choices of me looking at other people and saying, I know that there's expectations put on me and your opinions of me hold a lot of weight, but that is not what's going to be the decision factor for me in this. And actively having to choose that every day, because it's really easy to forget like, oh, I'm making the wrong decision. But no.
I love that. And that does take a lot of courage. And I tell you what, you are going to be so thankful for that, because I cannot tell you how many people I know in my age group that all of a sudden are just like, I've been doing this for, 25, 30 years and I hate this. And I've hated it for a long time. Yeah. And why did I stay in this space? Why did I do this? And you will never regret that. Reilly.
Well, I feel like growing up, we had like really realistic expectations like put on us, not something that you have to get A's in all your classes. It's like, go to school and like study for your tests and do your best and the rest will work out. And it did for all of us. And it was like, be a kind human and just like very bare minimum expectations for us, which I never felt this pressure to be something that I wasn't, which is really special to grow up like that. And so now I'm in this place of, I went to nursing school, I got my nursing degree and I started in the hospital, which is kind of the expectation that you start in a hospital as a nurse. And I've never once loved it. And so I've had shifts where I've loved my patients and I've had weeks where I've been like, okay, I'm liking my job, but I want the pleasure like Taylor is right now, where she loves what she does and she's so passionate about it. Yeah. So I feel like I'm teetering that line of let go of that expectation where I have to be the best nurses are in the hospital. Like, no, the best nurses are throughout our entire country, like in the most random of jobs that half of them I don't even know about yet. So I feel really like hopeful that I will get there. I'm just not there yet. Yeah. That's way okay. And I'll get there. It is.
Absolutely. In time. And you know that, and you're aware, being aware of it's half the battle. There's so many people that are so scared of the awareness, they won't even address it. They just run away from it. So it's a tricky one. And, I think you guys have all given good examples of how that looks and how you walk that out. And, but also too, I think you made a good point, Reilly, of, sadly, the environment that your parents provided for you is special. And I'm not it's special, sadly, that it's not the norm.
Right.
Our world would be so much better served if every kid could grow up in that kind of an environment. Cause, we're all doing the best we can. No environment's perfect, but that you're all speaking to that is, so important. And so and good for you all too, that you recognize that and are thankful for that. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but what are some ways that you use to process your emotion in some healthy ways? You're feeling the emotion, you need to work, get it out. What are some practices that really help you?
I really realize I'm more of an introvert, like my other 2 daughters. And same, Melissa, when you describe Brady, I think a lot of people think Jeff's this really gregarious, outgoing person too, 100% of the time. But he's got the introvert personality too. When he shuts off, it's like, okay, I don't want to talk. I don't want to hear you guys talk. I just want to have my space. If it's watching football, if it's watching sports, I don't want any interruptions. But because I'm an introvert, I need my alone time. So I don't have any problem removing myself or saying no to social engagements or going for a walk by myself. I work out at a place that doesn't require a lot of social interaction. But in a weird way, I also seek out that social interaction from girlfriends, coffee dates, walks, just, processing and venting and getting feedback. And those are my ways of kind of processing that for myself. Yeah. A little bit of both, alone time as well as some girlfriend time.
I think the girlfriend time is an important thing, ladies. Make times for your girlfriends. It is so important. Don't let that go by the wayside. It's the most important relationships that I have in my life. Have those people you can walk life out with. Super important.
I think for me, so I think just like the nature of what my life has looked like the past 5 years, like I've lived in a lot of different locations and built a lot of really strong girl friendships that have are deep and wide, and I love them. In this season of my life, I'm learning. I'm kind of an external processor, but to an extent, like I need to have my thoughts, like my arguments written out so they sound really nice before I'm externally processing with someone. So I have learned in this season, like the beauty in having like a handful of people, like 3-4 good girlfriends, and then my partner, and then the phone calls to my mom that I make like 4 times a week on my way home from work. Like that's okay. Like I don't need to live with my heart on my sleeve with everyone that was my best friend at WSU and then at TCU and then my time in La Jolla. Like it is okay that friendships and who I'm processing my emotions with looks different in different seasons. And like that was a really hard thing for me to learn because I care so deeply about my past friendships. But the reality is I'm never going to live neighbors or in the same house as them. And so it's okay that they don't know everything about my life because it was really hard to like keep everyone in the loop. And it was like re-traumatizing having to tell the story over and over again. And so
stops being helpful.
Yes. And so it has been good to and I love writing. And so I spend a lot of time journaling my thoughts out and maybe sharing my thoughts on social media. Like that's part of my routine in processing through my emotions. And so that's what it looks like right now is taking time alone, but also being with a handful of really strong friends to process those things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I feel like that's how I like to digest them myself a little bit first. And like I touched on earlier, I have a hard time feeling like I burden people with my emotions. So coming into like digesting them myself and then having the capacity to share it with other people, which I feel like I do like a lot with my mom and then just like a couple really close girlfriends. Cause like you said, the more you share it, the less helpful it really kind of becomes.
Yeah. I think that's the same for me too. And I touched on earlier, now that I'm back in the classroom, when I come home, I really do need like that half hour. Usually I'm doing some sort of workout, or a run or something where I can just be alone with my own thoughts without anyone else asking me questions or needing help from anything. And usually I put my headphones in a lot. So Tony knows when my headphones are in, it's usually because I just need to be left alone for a second. But yeah, and just kind of decompressing, I guess, because when I'm coming off a full day of work, interacting with people, I don't feel like I can give anything to anyone or answer any questions coherently.
You've been doing it all day long.
So just being alone. But I mean, my husband's always been very physically active. That's how he kind of processes emotions and is in tune with himself. So I've kind of picked up on those habits the last couple years. And so I find that they have continued this year, which is very nice because being back in the classroom has been a weird transition. But so keeping those routines and knowing, I keep telling myself this, I know once I do it, I feel better. So I'm just going to do it. So, sometimes you just got to talk yourself into it. You're always thankful later. But I think too, you made a good point about you didn't just get to go back in the classroom. It was just back to the way things were. There's all these other things that go with it that still aren't normal. And whatever normal is going to look like, I don't think any of us really know. So the importance for you to be able to make that space to do that and separate that out, especially with your husband who's been, working at home all day. He's like, all right, somebody to talk to. Someone to talk to. Yeah.
It's like, not yet. So but important though for the relationship too, not just for yourself, but for the relationship. The name of the podcast is Finding Empowerment, Embracing Layers. That's kind of what this whole context of what we've been talking about really wraps into. But give me a quick, kind of synopsis of how you feel like you live out finding empowerment, embracing layers. And when I talk about layers, I want to let's hit on that a little bit. Layers are all those parts of us, not just the good parts or the parts that we see the Instagram show moments. So talk to me about how you feel about those layers as you live out feel and how you are about embracing all those layers in yourself.
I think for me, it's just normalizing like the journey that I'm on in finding out who I am in all of these new seasons. And like, it has been such a gift to like come to this terms with like, I will never have it figured out. Yeah. And that doesn't mean I'm paralyzed in the unknown, but it's actually like, it lights a fire under me. Like, okay, I can make decisions in confidence now and it can change in the future. And so I think looking at myself and seeing not a black and white person, but a very like, yes, I have big feelings. Yes, I'm loud. Yes, I love building a lot of relationships with anyone. Like that's all really beautiful things, a part of who I am. Like I have a really hard time processing like hard things. Like I don't like to be sad, but some moments you need to be space to be sad, to like really dig and find like healing in those moments. And so I think for me, it's just normalizing that it's all going to look different in a year and in 5 years and 10 years. And I think that's what it looks like for me, is like not looking at things black and white, and looking at things, all of the colors, and accepting all of those colors in myself at the same time.
Really well said.
I think, to touch on like the changes part of that, like I'm very much of like a comfort zone person. And meeting people, specifically my husband, who've kind of pushed me to do things that I like never thought I would be able to do, and finding like empowerment in that. Yeah. So, like we became runners the last 2 years. So
I think a lot of people became runners the last 2 years.
But like pushing myself physically to do things that I didn't think I could do. So now I can say I've run a marathon and all this like now when I come to terms with like hard things that I have to go through, I'm like, well, I've done this, so I could definitely do this. And I think finding like that strength in that, and being okay with changes, and being okay with saying like, okay, I was this way and now I'm feeling, okay, I'm more of this type of person, and knowing that that's normal. Like you change through seasons of your life, and it's just normal. Yeah.
Absolutely. Just even changing the new season that I'm in as a empty nester. My Jeff and I are now together because he works out of the house. I work out of the house 2 days a week, but he's here most of the time. And when we were raising the girls, he was gone, I would say on average 3 days a week, Monday through Wednesday or Tuesday through Thursday. So we kind of had our own little routine when he wasn't in town. You know, meals look different, probably routines look different. Yeah. So during COVID, he's been home full time. I mean, I think he's gone on 2 trips in the last almost 2 years. Yeah. And just navigating that amount of time that we spend together, and realizing we both also need our space, and just the growth that we've had to come into as a married couple that now doesn't really have to worry about our kids like we used to, or, it's the same thing. It's a new phase, and it looks different, and we just are embracing it and learning along the way, and really getting able to voice, what we need differently from each other. Space. He needs a space. I need my space, and giving each other the freedom to, me spend my time with my girlfriends, or he has his basketball buddies that he might meet on a night or two, or just giving each other that freedom to realize that's needed in our relationship as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Really good points. A good friend of mine we're all kind of in that same phase right now. And she's like, I call it our finding layers phase. We're kind of finding the layers of ourselves that we haven't had time to explore before, because we've been in this kind of, raising the kids, making sure they're all good mode. I think we we've done a pretty good job of, having date nights and making those spaces for each other. But at the same time, finding those layers and what it looks like now to be together in this time.
And I think like one other thing, like for us to, yes, we're out of the house, but you, Bob, are always teaching. And I think right now, even more so, like as Ellie's in her second year of marriage, I don't know, it all gets confusing this last year.
It's a blur.
Second or third year, but like have been dating for a long time. And Reilly and I are in relationships that will progress to future levels potentially. And like to see our parents like fight to be together, like that's not normal. Like,
I know.
And it is such, I just like, it's a joy to watch and it's a gift to follow. And so I just think it's so special that we even get to learn from you guys now, being like in a different state and like in a different season of life.
Yeah. Well, we got an invitation from Reilly and Matt to meet them down in Arizona, and we're like, we had invitations to go socialize with 25-year-olds. It's like, we're in, we'll be there.
Exactly.
We couldn't keep up with them. Like they we're in bed by 10 o'clock and they weren't in it. I don't know even what time, but it was just so fun to be able to socialize with your kids on a completely different level, as young adults, and just seeing them in a different
I feel really thankful for that too. I don't know if this is kind of off topic or on topic, but that our relationship has developed like that. Like a lot of my friends, like some of them specifically, have never really gotten out of that like parent kid, like trying to control you. Here's my opinion. Listen to what I'm telling you kind of phase, where now I feel like we've progressed to like a friendship level, like being able to be very unapologetic and open with each other, and not feel like you're my parent and you're going to tell me what I should do or what I have to do, kind of thing. Yeah.
It's a fun phase. It's a nice phase, I think.
It is. And thank you for affirming your mom with that, because that's so important. I would say that I was having a conversation with Kylie sometime last couple months, and we were talking about that phase when things were hard and we made some moves. And did you ever feel like things were unstable? And she's like, no. She's like, the one thing that I've always known about you and Dad is that you love each other fiercely and you fight for each other. And she's like, no matter what happened, that never wavered. And I was always thankful for that, because we went through a phase in her friend group just got rocked by some really surprising divorces as those girls were all going into high school. And it was really hard. These couples were our friends. They were Kylie's friends' parents. And it was just, oh my word. And so I remember Brady and I specifically then, like, we had to really make sure the girls know that everything, that we're safe. And so to hear that come back around, I speak for your mom and say that is like, man, that is the most important thing, because again,
because that's not easy. I imagine it's not easy.
No, it's not. You fight for each other and you fight for the relationship, and there's got to be a level of commitment to that. But it's good to hear you affirming your parents in that too, because I think it is so important that everybody, it just changes the way you view your own relationships and what you expect for yourself. All right, Reilly, poor sweet Reilly is just like, wait for my turn.
No, I was just going to say with Arizona, it was really cute. Matt comes from, his parents got a divorce when he was in high school. And he also comes from a friend group where almost every single one of them is also divorced as well. So,
and he's an only child.
Oh man. So much going on there. Poor guy.
Yeah, he's got his own dynamic. So it's been really fun to invite him into our dynamic, and how much he enjoys like my sisters and their significant others, but then also my parents' relationship as well. Cause it was actually like his idea to invite them to Arizona. So it's just been fun to like have this like new layer kind of form, I guess you can say. I as new seasons come up and I realize these new layers form, or these layers that have always been there that I am just now like realizing. So yeah.
And you'll continue to realize them too. And this is more of a sister question, but I have to ask you guys, because I laugh about it. So when Sierra, the conversation in our family has never been about whether mom and dad would be okay with a guy. The conversation has always been about, will the sisters be okay with each other's guy? Like, that is way more scary for the guys coming in than it ever is talking to Brady and I. We're kind of like, culturally speaking, we should talk to them about it. But, it's like, and especially in our family, Courtney is like, And the girls are like, if Courtney doesn't like him, they are out. She is like, no BS. I mean, no. So talk about that as you've brought your partners in, how that's been with the sister dynamic, because you sisters are very close, much like our sisters, my daughters are very close. And how your partners have been too, because Reilly, you brought up a good point. My son-in-law, Tim, comes from, there's he and his brother, who's 5 years older. His parents are divorced, very different family dynamic. And so when they got married, Sierra was like, so just so you know, the first Christmas that I can't be with my family, I'm going to cry a lot. And it's not because I don't love you. It's just because I really can't imagine not spending Christmas with my family. I was like, geez, Sierra, poor guy. He's probably like, oh my God. And these sisters, I mean, like they got married and within 6 months, like Courtney lived with them for 3 months. And it was just like, oh dude, I hope you understood what you were getting. And he adores them. So anyway, so talk to me about that dynamic before we close things out today.
Well, so Tony and I have been married a year and a half, but we've been together since we were 19. So
okay.
We've been together for almost
so you've been at WSU
years this next. Yes. Yeah. Okay. So, I was a sophomore and he was a freshman. So we've been together for a long time,
okay.
But it took him a while. Like you said about Tim, like his family dynamics are very different. Mm-hmm. His parents are still together. He has 2 younger sisters that are actually the same age as Taylor and Reilly, which is funny. So he's the oldest child too, but just like some unhealthy family dynamics, like extended family dynamics. So he started spending time with our family. He was like, are these people like acting? Like, are they putting on like a face
a show for me?
Yeah. Like this can't be like normal. And I just had to, reassure like, no, this is just how it is. And we have, weird family dynamics.
Absolutely.
Oh,
yeah,
right.
absolutely.
Us too. We've got arms for family that we could all tell stories about.
Yeah. So, and he's more aware of that now, but like our, internally, like their small little family hub, he was just like, this is very weird, like not normal. Like we were so like in his eyes perfect that it just didn't seem like real. And he thought that people weren't being like
authentic,
real to him. Yeah. But now obviously he knows this is just the way we are. But
yeah,
I think I was never afraid to introduce him to anyone, but I also think that comes back to like our trust within each other. Like we trust each other's like decision making and like being confident in like what someone else thinks is like, the real deal for them. Yeah. And so I never felt like a fear or like someone was going to judge, but I also knew that if someone had a real concern, they would tell me about it. Like I wouldn't be worried that someone was like keeping secrets from me.
Right.
So,
yeah.
We really didn't have concerns. I mean, I think there was some dating maybe in high school with a few of the kids that we had these red flags, but you kind of knew, you knew deep down that these were not going to be
these were not the forever relationship.
Yes. Right. So you had those moments of conversations there, like, doesn't seem like somebody that you would be dating. And I don't feel like now that they're adults, you just see them making so many healthy choices that you really do put trust in their decision making when it comes to relationships as well.
Yeah, I was gonna say I had some questionable boyfriends in high school, and they knew, my parents knew they were duds, my sister knew they were duds, I probably knew they were duds, and so I think we all just had faith that they knew I was gonna figure it out.
Exactly. You were gonna realize when you found the one that wasn't the dad, you're like, oh, this is what they're supposed to be like. Yes.
I also think that's important to like let people navigate too. It's like this weird balance, right? Like wanting to be supportive of someone, but also tell them like when they could be making a wrong decision, but also not wanting them to like not figure it out on their own. It's a weird, yeah.
And I feel like our sisters, and maybe like like I said, kind of modeled by my dad. Like there was never an intimidation factor. Like he's just not that kind of guy. But I think I've never been intimidated by my sisters to like introduce people. But I think there is an intimidation factor of like our larger family, just because like my mom comes from a family that's very big and like close. Like it's not like I know all of my cousins, like have relationships with all of my cousins, and there's a lot of them on both sides. And like second cousins, like there's just a lot of people. So I think I'm more intimidated. Have always been more intimidated bringing someone into that, because I'm fearful of their perception of it, of like, oh my gosh, there's so many people. Like, how do you navigate this? And so I think that's always been, but it's never been like a weird sister dynamic of like someone needing to prove themselves. I always know that my sisters have my best interest in mind, but will also give me the space to figure it out first.
Yeah. That's a really nice balance. And I don't want to paint a picture of Courtney that she comes in.
Oh my gosh. No,
she does not. She's going to be like, Mom, I can't believe that. And I think that it goes back to that thing that you all know. And my girls, they're all fiercely for each other.
Yeah.
And so it's going to be like, if they ever say anything, it's going to be out of love. But
totally.
I think I feel more for the guys coming in. I'm like, I hope you're ready for this, because they love each other and they're going to be around. Name 5 activities that nourish you.
So these are in no certain order. Exercise, hard, sweaty exercise now is really nourishing for me. Time with my girlfriends or my daughters, coffee dates. That's what I miss the most about having them not in my same city. But hopefully we'll be able to see each other more with traveling and stuff. Nature, Priest Lake, hikes, being out on the water, exploring the lake, just the beauty of outside.
A little piece of heaven.
Great conversation with I have an incredible book group that meets every once a month. That's just a diverse group of women that I just love to bounce things off of. We talk about the book, but we also talk about life in general, and I get a lot of nourishment from them. Yeah. And then the 5th one is alone time, just realizing that there's, like my kids said, there's nothing wrong with needing alone time, and I take advantage of it when I need it. Yeah, absolutely. Very good. All right, Ellie.
Mom, you have my list.
Surprise.
Being literally almost the exact same order too, which is so weird. So, but being active, being outside, alone time, but usually I spend that time like reading or listening to music. More recently, like cooking or baking, just following the steps seems to be, kind of therapeutic. Yeah. And then, spending time with my core group of friends. Yeah. Like just small group. Yeah. For a limited amount of time.
So you got your alone time too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. All right, Taylor.
Mine are cooking. I've been loving cooking like new meals lately. Getting outside. The 3rd one would be spontaneity. So just like getting in the car, driving somewhere, or, just like trying out a new restaurant, like just things that aren't planned. Like I love having things not planned. I'm not much of a planner. The 4th one would be traveling. So like seeing new places or seeing old friends. And the 5th one would be, activity, like physical activity.
Okay. All right. And Reilly.
Think we're related. Reading, like wine night with friends, binge watching any type of
I'd add that to mine too.
Priest Lake, and then being around any type of animal.
Okay. All right. And then we're going to do in reverse order. So Reilly, you're going to get to go first for the first time today. I think I didn't do a very good job of balancing that for you. All right. 5 words on how you want to feel the next 6 months.
Loved, rejuvenated, rest, content, and excited.
Very good. Taylor.
I'm going to say, thankful, present, well. I think my friends were asking, I just recently turned 28. My friends were asking me about what do you want to focus on this year? And it's just like moving my body out of like thankfulness and joy and like being thankful that I can move. So I think there's a lot. That's that well component.
Yeah.
The fourth one would be challenged. And then the fifth one would be joyful.
Okay. All right. Ellie.
Loved / seen / heard. You know?
Yeah.
Healthy mind and body. Connected, like making memories with people. Embracing the unknown and open-minded.
Good. All right. Eileen, bring it home.
So I kind of focused on the word R, and I'm not really sure why, but I put recharge.
Okay.
Reduce, and that meaning reduce distractions, maybe. Even I feel like I scroll a lot on social media.
Yeah.
Reduce that time zapper for me.
Right.
Read more. I find that because of social media, I don't actually sit down and actually absorb a great book like I used to love to do.
Yeah.
And then, so that's 3. Also, on that reduce was also just getting, I function really well in a uncluttered environment. So that reduce would be to just go through the house and maybe get rid of some things that just are taking up space in more ways than one, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then the last one is adventures with my daughters. That's what I'm missing. We used to be able to have the freedom of just hopping in the car and going seeing Ellie and staying with her. And now we have to ask more questions. Is it safe? Is it, a good time for you guys with Tony? And so that's what I'm looking for. Adventures with my daughters.
Yeah. Very good. Thank you so much, ladies. This was so fun. And I really enjoyed getting to hear from you on these topics that you don't normally just sit down and talk about out of the blue if you run into someone. So I really appreciate your time and energy. Podcast audience, like I said, check out the sources doc and show notes to learn more about each one of these wonderful women, and follow us at Embracing Layers on Instagram. And you're welcome that you got to meet them, audience. So I get an example of more great people in my life that I get to know. So thanks so much for joining us, and have a great week.